Good morning, everyone. Good morning and
Good
almost
morning. Good morning.
Hi, good morning.
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 And say good morning into the space.
Morning, morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Unmute yourself, say hello into the space.
Hi,
We have
good
3
morning.
screens you can click over.
Hello, everyone.
Good morning. We might try and take a team photo as we begin. So if everyone can turn on their cameras, she might have to do 3 screens. 63 people on this call so far. Ready, Mickey? 3, 2, 1. Hi.
Good morning.
Hello.
Hello.
Wonderful. It might be wonderful for the first 20 minutes of the call today. It's going to be a little bit interactive. I think it would be wonderful just for 20 minutes if you're able to keep your camera on if you can, so that we can see you and also just know that we actually have real people behind the camera here. So it would be wonderful to do that. So today is the day. We might actually mute everyone, Mickey. Today's the day we've all been waiting for. For the past 12 to 18 months, research teams from across our 4 hub countries have been busy co-producing research and evidence that is needed to urgently transform education in all its forms. We've walked a journey together, and today we're coming together to celebrate and to showcase your work, and also to hear across hubs what are the shared insights and learnings. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Leon Tickley, who's going to introduce the conference. So a big, maybe let's give a mute round of applause for Leon Tickley as he comes on to introduce the conference. Thank you, Leon.
Thanks so much, Rosie, and good morning, everybody. In Hindi, Swagat, in Zulu, Sawubona, in Kenya, Rwanda, Murakuza Neza, and in Somali, Sudawal. We're really delighted to welcome everybody to this legacy event. And of course, it's the culmination, as Rosie said, of 3.5 years of very hard work on the part of many, many people. So I'm very excited about the coming few days. I think it will be a very energizing event because people have put in so much work into the projects, and we're really looking forward to hearing the fruits of your labor, and for us to be able to share in one space all of the learnings that we've managed to gather from our work. I'd like to start off, first of all, by welcoming everybody. We really appreciate the fact that you've taken the time out of your very busy schedules to share your learnings from your projects with us all over the next 3 days. I'd like to extend a special thank you to Rosie and her team, to Luke and Mickey for pulling this wonderful program together, which I think everyone will agree looks really exciting. We have such a good mix of reporting from the projects, from the hubs, and at a network level, and exciting things to reflect on, and of course your wonderful videos to share. And in a moment, Rosie will take you through the program. But I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank very much the Bristol team as well, Joe and Camilla, for organizing this, and Rona, of course, and Raphael and my Bristol colleagues. I'd like to very much thank the hub teams for your extraordinary work in helping to facilitate the events today. We had a very useful meeting in Kigali a couple of weeks ago, a month ago now, where we talked through the program and the ideas of the synthesis, and colleagues in the hub partner countries have been working very, very hard to support the projects and to get us where we are today. So a very big thank you to our country partners. And most of all, a very big thank you to the project teams. It hasn't been plain sailing by any means. We've had lots of things to contend with on the ground, the challenges of COVID and gathering data. We've been through a lot of adversity as project teams to get to this stage. And I know from having visited many of the projects how hard you've worked, and it's really impressive stuff. We've funded 67 projects as a network, and each of them is like a little nugget of gold. And we're hoping to learn about those nuggets of gold over the next 3 days, but also what it's like to bring them all together into one big chunk of gold. So I'm really looking forward to that. And thank you so much for all of your hard work, and really looking forward to hearing from you all. So without further ado, I'll hand back to you, Rosie, to run us through the program. But once again, welcome everybody, and really looking forward to the next 3 days. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Leon. And we look forward to hearing from you again on the beginning of day 3, when we'll be hearing from Rona, Leon, and Raphael launching the synthesis report. So thank you so much, Leon. It's been a privilege to be under your leadership. So as we step into the space now, before we go through the program, I just want to take a moment to really acknowledge the biggest gift that everyone has brought here. And the biggest gift is your time. Everyone has very busy schedules, and for you to have cleared out this time in your schedule is no small feat. So just a big thank you to everyone for doing that. So as we step into this, further into this space together, one of the things that we ask is, as you've cleared your schedules and as you're here, is that you really try and be present in body and mind, particularly to hear the stories that everyone will be sharing. There's a lot of time and effort that has gone into this, and we really hope that you're able to be present with their stories and with your own stories, and also to engage in all the various ways. We'll be using the chat. It's really there for you to engage, to meet others. Feel free to also direct message each other. You can post your contact details in the chat. There'll be a few different ways we're going to be meeting each other throughout the next 3 days together. So again, big thank you and acknowledgement for your time to be with us here over the next 3 days. So as we begin our time together and to step off into true TESF style, we'd like to ground with intention into the space. And to do this, we're going to be inviting Arundhati from India to bring us into our real bodies, even though we're projected digitally, through some words and through some song. So thank you, Arundhati. I invite you to take the floor.
Thank you, Rosie. Such an honor to be here and using song to set intention for this really amazing legacy that I've been seeing so much of in my inbox over the past few weeks. Very excited to be here. And today what I'm going to be singing for you is a song by a poet called Dharmi Das, who's one of the mystic poets in India. And he sings a song called Kin Sang Kara Sne, which means, who do I make friendship with? So the story goes that there's this beautiful forest and a sandalwood tree on which nests a parrot. And it's a lovely relationship that the parrot and tree share with one another. And she nests there and feeds her young there, and all of this is happening when one day there's a crazy, wild forest fire. And a fire so wild that it's quick and it's eating up anything and everything that comes its way. And in this moment, when there's fire and all the animals are fleeing and all the birds are flying away, the parrot finds it very difficult to fly away from her beloved sandalwood tree. And you know, the sandalwood tree says, hey, listen, I've got roots and I can't move. I need to be here and I'll most probably burn, but you have wings So fly away, little bird. Don't be stupid. Fly away. And in that moment, the bird looks at the tree and says, what do I fly towards? When I was in need of a home, I nested here. When I played, I soiled your leaves. And now, just because you're burning away, you want me to fly? How do I do that? What do I fly towards? And it is this moment that will actually define our relationship, our friendship, or what love means to me. So I thought this was, when Rosie reached out saying, can you sing a song? And I was like, yeah, I mean, I think I know the right one to sing here, especially since in a network, and when we're extending and leaning into solidarity, taking common risks, and sometimes just showing up is all we have to do in that moment, just breathing together, just showing up. So it is with that spirit and with that sort of intention setting that I present to you Kin Sang Kara Sne by Dharmi Das. Mari heliye kin sang kara maine Mari heliye kin sang kara maine kin sanga kara maine heliye sangata जोरे निर्मल साधरी संगत की जोरे निर्मल साधरी हेलिए चंदना उगोरे Bagma Har kara aban inra heliye chandana paas mein ja आप चंदन हुई जा हेलिए किन सांग करा मैं स्नेह हेलिए किन सांग करा मैं स्नेह संगत की जोरे धर्मी साधरी हेलिए दावा लगो रे मेरी बागमा पंछी रे बैठो हेलिए हमरे जलो रे पंख बिरो बिरो तब उड़ी पारे जा हेलिए फला अडोरे पा rodia. Ramiya hadaloda heliye tama jalo mein जीवानो हाकित रिकबार है हेलिए किनसा करो मैंने So the parrot is in the midst of this forest fire and is wondering what to do next. You know, she really wants to save her friend, the tree. So she goes and she dips into a lake nearby and she comes back. And with a few little drops of water that she has on her feather, she sprinkles it on the sandalwood tree. And then she goes back and she dives into the lake. And then she comes back again and sprinkles. She keeps doing this to and fro, to and fro. And it's just a few drops of water. Surely it's not enough to put the forest fire down, but she keeps at it. And her feathers are also burning along with it. And then finally, the gods up in the heavens, they watch the scene unfold and they're really moved by it and they begin to cry. And so what happens? It begins to rain, and it begins to rain really densely, and the entire forest fire is doused. So the last stanza goes, Heliye dava bhujore jhaad mein piye ढूंढे हाबूता में हेलिए कहता कबीरा धर्मी दास ने नीता नीता हनावलों ने हेलिए की निशान करा मैंने हेलिए की निशान करा मैंने
An applause for Arundhati. Thank you so much, Arundhati, for being with us here today. For those lucky enough to have seen her in person in India, thank you for sharing with us, Arundhati. Music always has a way of bringing soul and spirit into the space. And that is really what's needed today in our virtual space to do justice to the work that has been happening on the ground within the TESF network. So thank you for bringing that to us, Arundhati. Next up, we have something that's very important, and one of our key purposes of the Legacy event is a little moment in time just to meet each other. So Mickey, if you can share screen, we're going to take a moment to do something. It's very energizing. We're going to take a moment to meet one other person in the network. It's going to be very quick and short. We're going to go into a breakout room with one other person. So if you can pop your camera on, that's great. If you can't, that's also fine. You're going to answer the following question and you get 90 seconds each. So it's not very long at all. Say hello, say your name, where you're from, and answer the question. If you could change one thing in the world, what would it be? Welcome back, everyone. How was that?
Great.
Great.
Amazing.
We're going to have a few moments in time throughout our conference to do that. So you'll be meeting someone new throughout the network. It's nice to put a face to the name. And again, we're going to be moving on to our sessions very shortly, but if you can keep your videos on just for the next little bit so that everyone can just sort of see who's in the space. First up, we have the 2 parallel sessions at the top here. We have Transforming Schools for Sustainable Futures. And then at the same time, we'll have session 6, Alternative Learning Pathways to Support Sustainable Livelihoods. When that's finished, we'll have the next 2 sessions, Creating and Expanding Learning Spaces in Higher Education and TVET, and the role of local Indigenous knowledges in transforming education.
चिड़िया बोली कुट 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 चिड़िया बोली कुट 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 मुझको दे दो बिस्कुट मुझको दे दो बिस्कुट भूख लगी है खाऊंगी भूख लगी है खाऊंगी खा पी कर सो जाऊंगी खा पी कर सो जाऊंगी.
The Indian education landscape is one of the largest in the whole world, with more than 15 lakh schools, 97 lakh teachers, and 26.5 crore students. Many teachers join schools with aspirations and excitement. They see themselves as change agents, ready to put their learning to use and bring about reforms in school. That excitement is often short-lived as they gradually discover that they have a marginal role and identity in these neoliberal times. Constant inspections, pre-designed lesson plans, and scripted pedagogies have increasingly trivialized their voice and agency. Teaching is a relational activity, but when teachers do not have the agency themselves, how can they impart it to children?
To me, the reason behind this caged agency is because teachers are not even aware where are they positioned in this entire process.
Children are at the lowest rung. Nobody is concerned about children. Everybody is concerned कि reports बननी चाहिए, reports time पे जानी चाहिए, लिखा हुआ होना चाहिए, चाहे कराओ चाहे ना कराओ. They're treated like doormats. स्कूल इंस्पेक्टर्स आते हैं, वो टीचर्स को सुना के चले जाते हैं, ऑफिसर्स आते हैं, वो टीचर्स को सुना के चले जाते हैं, पेरेंट्स आते हैं. टीचर की कोई अपनी डिग्निटी नहीं है क्या?
While policymakers consistently acknowledge the centrality of teachers in the wider aims of education, the economic agenda is redefining their role as merely delivery agents, isolated from any decision making. The goalpost of education is constantly shifting from it being the practice of freedom, of critical thinking and reflection, to becoming an enterprise of skill development, deliverables and outcomes. Over the years, elementary education has remained the most neglected part in the school education system. In response to this, Bachelor's in Elementary Education program was introduced in University of Delhi 28 years ago for strengthening and enabling pre-service teacher education. The strength of the 4-year intensive program lies in its curriculum and its pedagogical preparation that helps student teachers develop critical interdisciplinary perspectives and create spaces for dialogue and reflexive thinking.
Gender and schooling made me a more aware person about the things that were happening around me, questioning more, nudging me to not just accept things that I would accept earlier. It made me realize how patriarchal our own homes were, how my rights were different from those of my 2 brothers.
While systemic pressures in the ecosystem expect compliance from teachers, Many graduates succeed in enabling their young students to create, imagine, wonder, and question by practicing theatre, storytelling, and self-development in their classrooms. In a largely structured education system, they are able to create informal spaces for such meaningful and engaging experiences through their own developing pedagogies in these practices.
I do what I wanted to do with my students and the way I wanted to do. Where the assessment is concerned, assessment जो है, जो उसमें पेपर आता है वो मैं बच्चों से ले लेती हूँ, बट मेरा assessment जो होता है वो मेरा खुद का assessment जो मैं अपने बच्चों के लिए बनाती हूँ, मैं assess उससे करती हूँ.
Despite constraints of policy impositions, PLET graduates continue to assert and exercise intellectual agency in their classrooms.
भूख लगी है खाऊंगी, भूख लगी है खाऊंगी, खा पी कर सो जाऊंगी, खा पी कर सो जाऊंगी.
In partnership with Transparency Solutions, have agreed to run a pilot eco-school project at Mohammed Morga Secondary School to test the hospitality and stability of such project in this region. The project will examine the school's environmental needs and help. As this is a pilot project and the first of its kind in Somaliland, a lot of effort and work is required to be undertaken to develop networking.
waa barnaamij uu u baahan yahay iskuul kasta oo Somaliland ku yaala intuu doonaba ha la ekaado primary iyo secondary ku doonaba ha ahaade. Barnaamijkan waa barnaamij horumarinaya moralka macallimiinta iyo ardayda. Waa barnaamij horumarinaya kor u kaca iyo in lagu dhiirido waxbarashada iyo deegaankeeda. Barnaamijkani waa barnaamij aan oran karo way ka maqnaa waxbarashada. Waa barnaamij aan oran karo waan tabayni. Waa barnaamij
waxbarashaduna waxay ku xidhan tahay ilaalinta deegaanka. Marka waa laba aan kala maarmayn oo isku dhafan oo sinaba u kala baxayn. Marka waxaan ugu talagalnay inaan ardayda tusno habka deegaanka loo ilaaliyo, loo fayadhowrkiisa, ilaalintiisa, ka shaqayntiisa. waxaas ayaan runtii aan barnaamijkaas ka shaqeynay waxaan ku bilownay runtii arday 20 ka kooban iyo laba macallin oo u tababarayno barnaamijkan in ayagu si hana qaadaan iskuulka gaarsiiyaan hadhowna community-gan ku xeersan iskuulka ay la wadaagaan maalinka soo arbaca waxaan ku train gareynaa kolba caqabadaha hor taagan in la ilaaliyo ama la qurxiyo iskuulka iyo deegaankiisa si looga shaqeyn laabaan ayaan tababar ku siinaa.
Iskuulkayu ma lahan dar fara badan, soo kale wuxuu leeyahay daarad barxada oo aad u weyn oo waafiya oo loogana sameyn karo garoomo ay namiyo gabdhaba ku ciyaari karaan.
barxad buu leeyahay dhir aan ka baxdo inta la harsado aba sida beero kale ma laha waxay leeyihiin digrawaayida mashakilkiisa dhibtiisa waad garaysaa. waxaan jeclaan lahaa in dhirtii la harshalayay dhirtii kala duwan aan ku beerano halka biyaha haddaan imaado iskuulka ma laha biyo amba majarooro loo qabto biyaha. waxaan jeclaan iskuulka loo sameeyo majarooro oo biyaha loo qabto iskuulka imika dee taangiido yaalaan biyo fiican ku jiraan oo dee hooyada ku shubta laakiin waxaan ka jeclaan lahaa ka Ilaahay raxmadda Ilaahay soo shubayo beerta ku filan wax walba ku filanayo inaan majaroorada u sameysano.
To help the school with water storage, a small concrete underground water reservoir was constructed. This will allow rainwater to be captured and stored for purposes such as gardening, tree planting, sanitation, and for other uses. After having carried out a number of activities within the school ground, the Eco School Club, along with its teachers, took a trip to a Kuwaiti school based in Hargeisa. The Kuwaiti school has a large farm a modern farm, which would serve as an example of what is possible with the right techniques.
يعني waxaan rajeynayaa ku maxaa iskuulkayga maxaan ogaanaa ku koobnaanan ku ilaa heer degmaan gaarno.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back into the room. If we can just turn on your video, give me a wave so I know that you're not all on tea break. Ah, hello, humans. Hello, humans. Hi. Hi. Thank you. We are going to move on to our next session. These wonderful Mojo films. Sorry, we had to cut the last one short, but we will be sharing them. You will be receiving our hot soup mailers that have been going out screening all of these, and you'll continue to see a lot of these films being screened in the breaks throughout the conference. So next up today, we have a very important part of our time together. We're on to our collective learnings, hub level synthesis and discussion. We're going to be hearing from two hubs today. We're going to be hearing from India, from Poonam and Amir, and then we're going to be hearing from Rwanda, from Michael and Dan. The format of today's session is each hub is going to take only 35 minutes to present, 20 minutes presentation followed by 15 minutes discussion with you, the network. And we're going to be running a poll in there as well. So without further ado, I invite Poonam and Amir to take the floor. I'm going to be screen sharing your slides. Is that correct? Oh, no, that's Rwanda. You're going to be screen sharing your slides. Is that correct, Poonam?
Okay,
Great.
I'll do that. Yes.
Welcome.
Does it look okay? Everybody can see? Okay. So let me begin. This is a very difficult task of synthesizing 23 TESF India research and intervention projects. But let me try and begin the presentation with a little background, and then Amir will also take over in between, and then we will conclude. So we started with basic research questions, which are some of the key questions are here before you. How is social, gender, economic, environmental, and epistemic injustice sustained and perpetuated in and through education? How does educational inequality intersects with other inequalities and impacts the most disadvantaged, including the urban margins? How does educational inequality impede the realization of the full potential of education in enabling social and environmental justice? How can education be transformed to develop critical knowledges, capacities, teacher and student agency towards developing socially and environmentally just societies? And how can Indigenous and local knowledges and interdisciplinary knowledges and frames be operationalized in teaching learning environments? These were the key research questions of the 23 projects that explored the dynamic relationship between education and sustainable futures. So it was important to look at the framing of sustainable development itself, beginning with what the foundation paper tells us. We had a project within the 23 that actually questions this. Even though we begin with the understanding that sustainable development is a critical application of ideas of sustainability to local contexts, we find that most of these approaches that have tried to refine the idea continue to operate within a dominant frame, which is really that of economic self-interest of some of the regions and some people over others. And this is despite inclusivity and attempts to address diversity. So questioning this dominant frame of development is Yamuna Sunny's project, where she argues that the close association between capital, trade, and the development of environmental regimes in the neoliberal era on the one hand, and the appropriation of sustainability logic by international actors on the other, necessitate that we critically examine the notion of sustainable development. And we find that market-based policies have certainly led to increased economic growth, but they do not address social, ecological, economic sustainability. And this prompts us to revisit the sustainable development as a construct and as practice. We do have decolonizing knowledges and attempts to expand the idea of development, and diverse worldviews of the colonized, of the marginalized, have actually been foregrounded. But these also compel us to address conceptual contradictions within the frame of development. For example, we do know that while there is mainstream modernity, development, economic growth narrative, there is also livelihood loss, deepening inequalities, and ecological degradation. So let's learn from communities who are really outside the ambit of development. And this is what one of the projects does, where the question, which is larger, of sustainability is not that of only protecting forests and ecologies in which people live, but of listening to their voices. And co-creating knowledge with Indigenous communities led to examine the nuances of ecological and social relationships in tribal societies. And the word tribal has been put in inverted commas to indicate that it is a system which is both social and connected with nature. It isn't something that can be subsumed under a generic term, indigenous communities alone. But these communities, actually for them, individual competition for capital is not the fulcrum of development. And therefore the question, whose knowledge? Co-creating knowledge with the Bharia community, and we heard Yamuna talk about that, found that the school actually creates alienation for children because there is a narrow range of selective knowledge that they're exposed to. And this is a pedagogic as well as a knowledge representation challenge. The study clearly shows how education seems to be working exclusively to legitimize a particular kind of development. And therefore, alienating the Adivasi, the tribal school child, is what we find in other projects as well, where the ethos of the school is based on teachers as well as peer discrimination. Textbooks depict Adivasi communities in very stereotypical ways, and the school assessment program also is one where a culture of competition is encouraged, which is completely dissonant with the Adivasi values of unity and cooperation. So the question is, do we have an Adivasi worldview that helps us to revisit the meanings and purposes of education? There is a very interesting observation in this project which talks of tribal cultural norms and economic practices that actually include ideas of collective ownership and harvesting sustainably. And this is in the frame of long-term cohabitation. Their idea of education of their children is that children must be able to navigate their home worlds as well as the knowledge of the modern world, but with dignity and character so that they can lead the values, the lives that they value. They wish to reclaim village as a site so that there is abstract academic knowledge alongside traditional Adivasi knowledge forms. This serves to strengthen relationships across generations, including building youth leaderships. There are projects then that look at epistemes and learning, trying to problematize these frames. School textbooks, for example, have a utilitarian, anthropocentric approach to forests and wildlife conservation, where forests are a resource and extractive practices are talked about for human welfare. Decontextualized from local milieu and the lived experiences, these texts do not allow students to observe and to problematize local questions. For instance, texts emphasize physical and scientific aspects of water, but they're silent on water history or water sources that are deeply linked to unequal power equations within the society across gender, caste, community. The question, therefore, is that do these texts really aid in building interdisciplinary viewpoints? And the observation is that they don't. So there is also an attempt within some of the projects to expand the frames of epistemes. For example, a project argues that the dissonance that is there between the textbook knowledge and children's lived experiences could be actually dealt with by focusing on the everyday. The everyday creates fissures in the normative understanding of community, of identity and belonging, and therefore allows us to deconstruct stereotypes. It opens up possibilities of understanding intersectionality between class, caste, religion, region, gender. This is a project that was done and looked at citizenship from a children's viewpoint, from a child lens. There's another project that really beautifully brings out the caste-based inequalities and how the privileged of our society look at it. Clearly, the privileged sections do not even see caste as relevant to their lives because they themselves see themselves as casteless. So engaging with caste, which is really a hierarchical social system in Indian society, they find that the privileged were able to, through collective reading of Dalit biographies, Dalit is those of the lower caste, their biographies, actually gave entry points for engaging with the caste question. And a very, very telling comment of one of the participants is that I had never imagined, even looking at caste as a part of my life. But when I was emboldened to extend this experience to a group of family and friends, I find that the journey to face caste is very discomforting. By not undertaking it, we actually live a lifelong lie. There's also an interesting project that looks at the gender spectrum from the viewpoint of gender non-conforming, gender non-binary persons in the Indian science ecosystem. And what is found is that there is not only a gendered nature of science institutions in the higher education specifically, but the curricula and the epistemological discourse is discriminatory, and it constantly erases the trans identity. Another project finds in examining first generation higher education learners from families of stigmatized occupations, how difficult the process of accessing curriculum, comprehending curriculum in higher education is. And the interesting insight is that they still do not look at it as institutional failure, but they see it as individual failure. So what the conclusion is that the occupational stigma is embodied and it intersects with caste, gender, and other identities. A project with low fee paying private school teachers reveals that their labor is reproduced and is denied the status of real work. In fact, teaching for many of these women teachers in these schools is found to be an extension of socially expected roles of performing a seva, which is service, but towards a caste society and in a caste society. So the real argument is that teachers' work is devalued within the intersectional frames of caste Hindu notions of seva, service, and Brahminical notions of ideal womanhood, which are still very strong in India today, and Western formulations of professionalism. So any Western formulations and concepts do not help us to break this nexus. It only makes it more rigid and further aggravating. But we have a silver lining. We have several projects giving us a glimpse of transformative practices in higher education. For example, we find that when we are able to present a connection between individual biographies and socio-political histories, it really empowers young people. And it enables the unlearning of privilege without shame. Dialogue-based pedagogy is used to engage student teachers also with patriarchal norms. And this is seen as a political act. The intervention creates empathy. In teacher education, we find that there is a way to disrupt the traditional classroom and break the culture of silence by turning the lens from the study of the other to the study of the self. And theater is certainly something that brings to us, it is not only a political act, but a transformative process, enabling to help us to witness the way we are and acting from that space of clarity. The pedagogic engagement with privileged students as researchers also reveal the journey of developing critical empathy. And I will come back to that a little later. I'd leave it to Amir to address the section on education and the urban.
Yes, urban is a very interesting site, equally important for both Africa and Asia. And one of the things that we are trying to look at is how do we problematize education in and for the urban? And there were a few projects that kind of examined this question. And one of the important things that emerged was that maybe previous slide, this is slide, no. Yeah, exactly. So education is is challenging in the urban context, and it's definitely not the pathway to economic or social mobility, or in a sense to be a claim onto the city. And there are complex processes that's limiting the role of education, and even the market-facing skills, etc., where 80% of the urban livelihoods they are in the informal sector. So education is not empowering, and some of the peculiarities of a particular urban domain is also not recognized. For example, the northeastern part of the country. Next slide. So one of the interesting insights that emerged from some of the projects was that can we kind of develop an epistemic and practice-based repository. So we have a project on food that documents what is possible. We also have a project around water, which helps us understand and develop skills, perspectives, and reflexivity needed towards understanding a particular resource. Next slide. And so is there a possibility to address urban sustainability through education? Yes. The project on professional education helps us that look, there are structural constraints, but there are certain pedagogic, curricular, and policy strategies that can be adopted. We can invert the process by making research accessible to marginalized youth and help them learn, build critical capacities, and look at city as the learning lab. And then we can develop pedagogies that link research, training, and public engagement to look at questions of sustainability. Next slide. Yeah, over to Poonam.
Yeah, thank you, Amit. I will just quickly, I know there are very few minutes left. Basically, 3 slides here. Firstly, that projects capture a range of structures, implicit and explicit processes that have prevailed in Indian society over generations, and these have favored the privileged and certainly intensified by India's economic modernity development narrative. The formal spaces and structures are impermeable and ineffective in altering any equations of hierarchy and power. Formal education, in fact, sustains and reinforces these inequalities, camouflaging the magnitude of the problem. But social and environmental justice are clearly intertwined, but they are seen as disconnected. The question, therefore, is, can we reset priorities to transform education? Educators, for instance, need to recognize, reevaluate, and alter the way their own epistemic, ontological, pedagogical contexts and assumptions that they bring when they teach diverse communities. Transformative pedagogies must seek to turn the lens from the study of the other to the study of the self and engage with structural nature of inequalities, including patriarchy and caste, and its nexus with the free market. Theatre and the arts give us many such openings when it allows people to speak about their vulnerabilities. But let me say here, vulnerabilities does bring an entry point for transformative processes of learning. But adopting these egalitarian and dialogical methods of learning, where we include the marginalized, is only part of the transformative story. The real story is when pedagogies enable privileged educators to find ways to acknowledge and accept their role in sustaining caste, gender, and socioeconomic inequalities. Learning more about caste, for instance, can result in denial, guilt, and shame, and these create barriers to change. Transcending this involves what a project tells us is developing critical empathy and ethics of care. This journey of developing critical empathy involves confrontation, reflection, and visceral knowing of structural nexus, complicity, and the self. Thank you very much. I hope I haven't exceeded my time, and we can now move to, I will have to stop sharing my screen. Just give me a second. I don't know why I have got stuck.
Thank you so much, Poonam and Amir, for your wonderful, deep thought and insight that has gone in over many, many months. We're still part of the session here, but what we're going to move into now is a space for the next 15 minutes for Poonam and Amir to answer questions from the audience. But first, we're going to actually run a long answer poll. So I'm going to pop the poll on the screen, and you'll be able to respond in paragraph form. So please, as you see it on there, would love to see your responses. Poonam and Amir will gather these after the conference, and we'll may not be able to respond to everything during today's session, but it's a space to capture your thoughts. So first question, what are the top 3 things that sparked, yes, we found that too? Second question is, which 3 things do you feel, no, that doesn't really apply to our project? And lastly, what would you like to add based on your project experiences?
Okay, so I take over, right? Amir
Yes.
and me. Okay. Amir, would you like to start?
Well, I mean, thank you for saying good things about the presentation, and thank you for keenly listening. And of course, we had a range of things to talk about and of course, the 23 projects deserve real applause for putting in their sweat and toil and doing some fantastic work, new research, new ways of engaging with research questions and coming up with something that we worked together and brought and put it into a framework. So so they deserve a lot of accolades, and this is an opportunity to thank them as well. I think I don't know how to engage. One of the things that has always fascinated me and Poonam is interrogating the ideas of sustainable development, and this is what we started with also. And if you recall Poonam's presentation, there's some,
So here are the
content
yes.
coming. Teachers, worldviews.
We'll probably have to, yes, we'll have to look at this closely. I hope we can look at this. There's a lot that has come in. I'd really like to look at this closely and perhaps also see if we can incorporate some of the comments in the final synthesis work that we will do. Shall we invite, since we have very little time, invite questions and comments from the audience?
Yeah.
Any questions? Anything that you'd like to tell us?
Daniel.
We've heard good things, but do be brutal and let us know. Yeah. Yes, Daniel and Hyla.
Hello, everybody. Firstly, thank you so much for sharing and the reflections that came forward. I find it quite enriching. I suppose I also have a lot more reading to do, because I think that's the nature of these events. But I just want to check in. So in South Africa, we don't necessarily have, or we've not necessarily had the caste system, but we've had apartheid and, you know, racial segregation, and that's now led into where we stand and find ourselves. I mean, at the end of your presentation, you vocalized that diving into topics like the caste, and the more you learn, the more uncomfortable and resistant you become. How did that show up in ways that you've moved forward in this project? I mean, here in South Africa, the kind of challenge of the kind of continuation of apartheid and the systemic issues have definitely found us, or we've definitely found it to be quite halting in our unpacking of knowledge and transforming education. But I'm curious to know how one doesn't become too limited by systemic injustice in the process and in the kind of build to transforming education. Yeah, thank you for that.
Shall I respond to this, or shall we take a couple of other questions? We have very little time. Rosie?
If you'd like, we can take Hayla's question, and then we'll pause for the response, and then we can take Patrick's question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, Patrick,
Thank you for the
Hi, Patrick. Sorry, you're actually next. We're going to get Taylor's question, and then they're going to respond, and then we're going to go to you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, sorry, Shine. Patrick could have gone. I just want to say thank you very much to Poonam and Amir and the India team for that presentation. You know, what struck me as I was listening to you was just the, if I could call it, the deep-seated connections around the aftermath and the fallout and the conundrums that have been produced by colonial modernity. I think you phrased it so nicely at one point. And the deep legacies that are sort of sitting there for all of us. And for me, it felt like, you know, wow, this is something that it would be really useful to reflect on across the contexts, because it feels to me that they, you know, when I was trying to answer the question, you know, what is not relevant to my context, I actually couldn't find anything in what you'd said, because pretty much everything is just so resonant here, as Gabriel was also beginning to ask a question around. So for me, that was very important insight. Of course, we sort of know that, but to see it coming through so beautifully is very interesting, I think. So thank you. I just wanted to mention that.
Poonam, would you like to respond to the first two, and then we'll move on to Patrick? Sorry about that, Patrick. We'll come back to you.
Yes, I wish we had more time, but very quickly, my response would be that what I was trying to say is, I mean, certainly, I think there's so much of resonance. In fact, I remember when in 1994, when South Africa was actually able to end apartheid, it was almost like we were at the beginning of the time when India became independent. I mean, literally, that was the feeling we had for you. And we felt there was so much common. I mean, there's race and there's caste here. But of course, the question of, facing caste comes from two specific projects, specifically among the privileged. And I think what insights that have emerged, one is from actually a project where library educators were engaged with on Dalit biographies and reading caste, and amongst the privileged, how they look at it. The other was from a set of researchers who participated in the project that worked on first generation learners from stigmatized occupation families. And it seems that the privileged seems to think that there is no caste really, and that we have achieved a casteless society. But to enable us to face that as it's like an entry point into imagining transformative pedagogies, not for the privileged, but for everyone really, because it's a question of not resistance to it, it's a question of breaking a nexus. And I would repeat here, it's a nexus between the kind of systemic frames that we work in, whether it's the free market economy, whether it's the whole baggage of modernity, which is only sort of being enhanced and augmented with the kind of oligarchs we have today, and the transnational way of sort of looking at these nexus, and the Brahmanical notions, which are so deep-rooted within Indian society. And that comes out even in the research with teachers, for example. And I think that is an important aspect. Unless we, the privileged, are able to confront this and actually accept our complicity in maintaining a status quo of a certain kind, I'm not sure whether we can work. We'll be continually talking at the vulnerable, but not really with them to enable deep-rooted change. That's the way I would look at it.
Thanks, Poonam. We have time for 2 last questions. Patrick, if you'd like to ask a short question, and then we have Kerry who posted one in the chat, I believe. Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you very much for that nice presentation. Now, my question is, among the privileged who are seeing this and they want to bring change, how will they champion this change to have a casteless education? Yeah, you interacted with them. What are they thinking? What actions should they take to bring this change, so that people don't believe that they should be privileged to have education? For them, they are from privileged class. They have seen that it is not relevant. Everybody should have this education. So now, what action are they taking? How are they going to champion this change? Thank you.
Yeah,
thank you, Patrick.
I think this is not really a question where we can answer through from an individual viewpoint. There is a systemic nexus, the politics, the economics of it, the whole socio-cultural sort of nexus along with that. It's a much deeper question. And the challenge, what we have been able to develop as insight is that there is a possibility here. The possibility of bringing resistance pedagogies, the possibility of creating and giving a voice which can actually be heard in the corridors of power.
Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks. And I think we have time for Helen's last question. Helen, would you like to go ahead?
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. I'm sorry my camera's not working. I guess I just wanted to, it's really to push you a little further on the same lines as, I don't know whether it was Gabriel or Daniel who actually asked the question about, I mean, to play devil's advocate as a sort of counterfactual, one can imagine a particular Hindutva ideologue claiming, for example, that, maintaining caste where, you have different communities variously doing their farming, protecting ecological diversity, sweeping up and so forth could be an ecologically very sound way of proceeding. I mean, of course, I'm not saying I advocate that, but we know about inequality and structural inequality. What are the implications of these findings that just show how deeply entrenched it is in terms of then trying to look more at sustainable futures, and what potentially you'd be advocating if I could suggest anything less than a fundamental radical transformation, which realistically is probably not going to happen in the very near future?
Yeah, I think, I couldn't agree with you more. It's a very hard battle to be able to move even the discourse on structural inequalities. For example, even the SDGs sort of framework is a normative frame. And I find educational inequality missing from the list of SDG goals. And to my mind, a lot of the structural inequalities are reinforced, sustained in and through education. So education does have a space and a role to play, but we're always sort of, juggling between education as a space of continuing the status quo and entrenching it further, and being able to create. Therefore, the question is that education alone cannot do this. And I think interventions towards sustainable futures would have to be at multiple levels, probably in almost all the areas where we find inequality and injustice, including political representation or social, epistemic injustice and justice, for example. So it has to be on multiple fronts. And I do not see this battle having won easily, except that these researches do show us that there is a way to first problematize the situation and the issues rather than jump at solutions with half-baked understanding of what is on the ground.
Thank you. Great answer.
Thank you so much, Poonam. Thank you so much, Amir. We've come to the end of this session. I know that there's still a lot to reflect on from the polls. I've actually managed to download it and I've already posted it in the chat, so it's there for everyone to scroll through as well. We just want to give a big round of applause to Poonam and Amir. They will be reflecting on some of the questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thanks. It's nice to turn on the videos just to give them a round of applause. It really is nice to see everyone's faces. Wow. Excellent.
Yeah, thank you so much, colleagues. I hope you hear me well. I'm Michael from Rwanda. Perfect, Eric. Thank you for the signal. I'm Michael from Rwanda, and going to be presenting with Dan. I want to appreciate everyone here, but most importantly, the team from Rwanda, whose ideas, whose works I'm going to sort of like summarize. I hope I won't do much justice because we have 20 minutes. They've done incredible pieces of work, well commended. I'll let Dan do kind of in methodology issues, then I can jump in for the next discussion. Dan, over to you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, thank you. Actually, this is a presentation from Rwanda, and before we go deep to the findings and the evidence, we thought it would be better if I present, first of all, the methodology we used to get to those evidence. We represent the next step. So the picture you see there is the picture of the representatives of project teams. Not everyone is there, but those are representative. Those are PI and co-PIs, and those who are in charge of monitoring and evaluation in teams. Next slide. So the main question which we were answering in Rwanda was, what kind of transformation does the education systems need to act as driver to sustainable development? Actually, we commissioned 14 projects from Rwanda to try to gather evidences and the thought and the ideas on how we can answer this question. So we can go to next slide. So as you can see, those 14 projects were disseminated in the whole country so that we can gather evidences from the whole country in all provinces and all districts. Some of projects were working in 2 or 3 districts. Some others were working in 5. So those are, that is how we disseminated the project in the whole country so that we can get everywhere in the country and gather evidence from all regions and from all context in our country. So we divided those projects into 3 community of practices according to the themes they were working on. The first one was the cities and the community. The project which we were working on the cities and community, we had 3 of them. And we had the project which we were working on livelihood. We had many of them because they were 7. And the project which we were working on climate action, we had 4 projects working on climate action. That is how our projects were divided into different community of practice. Next slide. So the methodology which we used to get to the Rwanda Hub report, we passed through 3 steps. The step number 1 was generating data and record data. The second one was to analyze the data. And the last one was to synthesize the data. In data generation, actually, this was done throughout the project, because each project was collecting data, analyzing and putting the data together into different output. Some were producing report, midterm report or final report. Some were producing policy brief, and others were producing papers in a journal. So that was at the project level. So at the hub level, we have put together those output, those documents which we produced from a project, and we started analyzing them throughout the community of practice, putting together with the data which was collected at the hub level, and other national and international documents which were related to TSF objectives and research questions. So after that, we tried to synthesize them. That means we have put them together to see the diversity from project and the commonalities from project. Actually, first of all, we created the categories in each project. Then we have put together those categories at the community of practice level. And that means we put together the categories which are created in the cities and community, categories created in the livelihood community of practice, or category created in the climate action community of practice. Then we try to see the diversity, if there are some things which are similar or things which are different. So from that, we created the themes which we worked on when we were developing our report. So Mike, I think I can come to you to present to us those themes and other issues we discovered when we were analyzing the evidences from our project. Thank you.
Next, Rosie. Next slide.
Sorry,
please.
Dan.
Mike.
Yeah, I'll go to the next slide.
Sorry, just a moment, Mickey's moving it over.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, well, I hope you can read this. I'll be brief. These are some of the issues that were addressed by the projects. Now, what we did, we looked at the common issues that were addressed across the 14 projects. And you look at the issues of collaboration and dialogue, the issues of skill gap, the issues of inequality in the education system. These were some of the issues. I think we can go next slide so that I don't take much time. I'll be discussing this one in detail. Next, please. Perfect. These were the themes again. The first theme was the democratization of knowledge creation and sharing. The second theme, under which we discuss findings, is addressing social inequalities and inclusiveness. I'll shortly discuss about that. Creating safe spaces for knowledge sharing and co-creation. The role of Indigenous knowledge systems, of course, that one also was addressed. The skills and competences for employability, we had projects focus on this. And then you have technology as an agency for impacting knowledge. We have community education systems as opposed to school-based education systems, food security, integration of climate change. These were the emerging themes, and I'll be glad to discuss these ones briefly in the next slide. You can go next, please. Perfect. In the concept of in democratization of knowledge and creating and sharing spaces, there are three principles here, and this was a cross-cutting across all projects. One is that when you democratize knowledge, there has to be access and accessibility. And intentionally, you have to create possibilities for participants to reach each other by altering the physical and psychological spaces. If the spaces have power domination, if, for example, the sharing knowledge is held up in the city, if complicated infrastructure, you really cannot bring someone from the village and expect that he's going to be sharing knowledge freely within that urban complicated space. Another thing is that the element of participation, the projects were very cognizant that dialogue and participation are very key in sharing and creating knowledge. And we were very intentional that we encouraged teams to communicate in the language forms that they were comfortable in by using Kinyarwanda. Then, of course, the contribution. There must have been an intentional strategy to acknowledge everyone's effort. You know, knowledge is power, and if you are perceived as not having power, then your knowledge is not, validated. So we're very intentional, methodologically going into this, that all projects were cognizant of this. Next. Next, Rosie. Okay, great. These are some of the examples that one, when you're democratizing knowledge, there was intention to demystify learning spaces and promote knowledge sharing. In the first picture, the actors in this space are the local government officials, the school leaders, the parents, and the children. This was one of the projects planting trees, and the person you see in the green is the Minister of Environment. It's rare that the Minister of Environment and the kids and the parents would share this critical moment and learn together. So in democratizing knowledge, this was found to be very, very useful. Democratizing this space was very critical. In the next picture, you see one of the projects that worked on empowering women with sewing skills, but also on digitizing, digitizing the marketing strategies. Again, you look at women here. We pride in having many women in the local government structures, but we know that nationally, just Rwanda, like other countries, have these marginalized cases. So this was one of the projects also promoting that. Challenging the power dynamics during the co-creation of knowledge was a very key theme in these projects. Next. Next, please. Okay. Again, addressing social inequalities and inclusiveness was also adhered to as a cross-cutting theme. You look at the first picture, we're merging Indigenous knowledge systems and modern approaches to addressing gender-based violence. This was one of the projects in the northern part of the country, that communities would sit together, tap into the traditional ways of resolving conflicts and merge it with the modern, modern ways of resolving conflicts. Poonam talked about the role of Indigenous knowledge. I think this came out very, very clear and out. Then, of course, there was a theme of involving outstream voices as opposed to the mainstream. You know, this is a group of the deaf-blind. Rarely do you find their voices aired in the mainstream. So this was one of the key projects that brought out the voices of the marginalized, and it was well acknowledged in terms of advocacy. We go next. Next, please. Yes. This is one of the projects again, involving and embracing technology. You can use technology. It was realized in these projects to market out products. This is the group that was provided with sewing machines, and you can't, in the modern world, you can't market effectively if you don't integrate knowledge in the informal sector, as opposed to having technology purely in the schools, in the informal education settings. This was also found to be very powerful. Yes, I take note of that. There is the art-based approach to education. One of the safest ways to communicate messages was found to be through the art, where girls came and talked about messages that would be complicated, yet they passed them on through songs, through drama. This was found to be these are transformational educational approaches that were found to be very effective. Next, please. Next. Okay. Again, we are tapping into the Indigenous knowledge systems and creating and sharing knowledge here. Rwanda is known to have a very good space in terms of local-led initiatives. And here we are planting community gardens. The picture on the right, it's a very huge community metaphor that the project planted a tree so that if the tree sprouts with fruits, so they should be reminded of the journeys they walked during the resolving of the gender-based violence. This is a very powerful, image and a metaphor that is relevant to the community itself. And then next, please. Next. Then this is Indigenous. This is called a garden for vegetables in the neighborhood. The communities are tapping again. The farming is not very modern. They are tapping into what works for them to make sure that they have enough food. In the background, I'll share briefly in the next slide again about the produce that came from this. Next, please. Go next, please. Okay, next.
Sorry, Michael, the Zoom screen share takes a couple of seconds to change. So when you say next, it's coming, it's just Zoom.
Got you. Thank you
so
for that.
currently it's showing theme 4. Do you want to go next, Michael, or are you happy with the slide?
Yes, please. Next.
Okay. Yeah, it just has a little bit of a lag.
Okay, this is again one very important picture. When you're tapping into Indigenous knowledge systems, one is the discussion we can have about this one is that knowledge is validated by the powers to be. And the challenges we have, I don't know whether it's the same in other countries, that most of the Indigenous knowledge is not perceived as knowledge because it's not been validated, for sharing into the public, national narratives. People have to contest this kind of thinking. And I'm glad that people are, they are trying to get this one out. But even as we say that, we should be very cognizant that knowledge contemporary is validated knowledge, and it's the powers that validate. And the Indigenous people don't have that power, which is good because most of the studies of the TSF has contested that kind of thinking. Next. Then this is building the capacities of the people. We have very many samples of projects here that build the capacity of women, that build the capacity of young people for urban life skills. We have projects that build the capacity of urban people into reproductive health. These are some of the examples that we give. Next, please. And please, they are very clear. Yes, this is technology. Again, we are talking about the importance of digital knowledge within the current contemporary education arena. We have digital artwork that worked very well here. It is a sample of what could have worked well in these projects. And the digital mainstreaming digital skills was very, very appreciated. Next, please. This is creating a community learning model. Again, we are tapping into the local skills. You can see the picture there. The theme is community education for sustainable futures. You cannot get community out of sustainable development because everything starts from the communities, and we better tap into the community knowledge systems. And that's what is being done now there. Planting local trees as a metaphor to capture the journeys of their learning. Next. Food security, school has been perceived as alienating sometimes because you alienate students from their livelihoods. You teach them math, you teach them STEM, you teach them computer, but they cannot be functional members within their agrarian communities. And we had one of the projects promoting that. You can see kids are doing gardening, they are doing harvesting here. This was one of the projects that actually strived to demystify the modern or the contemporary understanding that children learn from schools and learn less in their neighborhoods. And the school is responding to the community needs now. Next, please. Next. Integrating climate action and learning. We had children as young as 5 being taught about planting trees, being taught about the eco-school systems, planting trees, having environmental labs. We look at this one as very strong because once these environmental protection values are embedded when kids are still young, then they get the possibility of mainstreaming these skills and values when they get old. And we found this one very, very effective as well. Next. Coping with the growing urban cities, Dan talked about this. Increasingly, we're having urbanization, and formerly rural areas are being caught in the urban cities. So what this project did was to train people on livelihoods, on financial literacy, because you can only adjust so much if you're not trained for the urban city. Very different life situations. And one of the projects was really very proactive in educating for financial management, in educating for urban life skills, land use, and all that. Next, please. About to finish. Next, please. Next. I got the conclusion. Next, please. Yes. The last, okay, the previous one, sorry. We're talking about alternative pathways to learning. Learning cannot be so mainstream. If there is anything that we learned about these projects, learning takes different forms. And there are very many alternatives to learning. We talked about the power of poems, the power of traditional songs, some of which are not found in the modern education systems. We talked about the power of drama, especially when you are talking about contested and complex issues. It's a safe space for me to sing about, to communicate a message through a song, as opposed to maybe confronting someone, the power to be, and telling them my perspectives. So we acknowledge, as we close this, that learning takes various forms, and some of these forms are very transformational because they are very personal, they are inward out, and we should be better in order to promote sustainable development, sustainable education. Then we should embrace all these various forms of learning, and as much as possible, encourage them to be mainstreamed into various education systems. Next, which is the last. Okay, in concluding, we say it's very important to, as we complete these projects, to sustain the networks, sustain the linkages, and sustain interactions among stakeholders, but be very cognizant that there are voices whose knowledge is very important, and create safe spaces in which they can share their knowledge too. Another thing is that we embrace the various pathways. But overall, I think I would conclude by saying that knowledge in its various forms, has to be validated. Doesn't have to be validated, but usually is by the mainstream. I think this one is a challenge that maybe could be found in other hubs. That when you talk about ancestral knowledge, traditional knowledge, people have a negative connotation to it sometimes because of the colonial legacy of the neo-colonial. Knowledge has to be quantified, and we believe that our ancestors never quantified their knowledge. So this non-quantified knowledge from the ancestors, which is actually part of our identity, has to at some point find itself in the mainstream. I'll conclude here and answer a few questions if they're there. Thank you so much again for facilitating this.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dan and Michael. Would you like me to kick off with the poll, or would you like to take some questions and then we do the poll? Okay.
Maybe you can do either. What do the other think? Either way, I'm okay with maybe take some questions on the poll. I would love to take some questions before the poll, because the poll, there are going to be many. I'm going to be answering at a later time, possibly.
Great. We'll keep it to the last couple of minutes. Thanks. Over to you, Michael, to take some questions. Please raise your hand. We can take 2 questions at a time, and then you can respond. I'll pop in the chat who's put their hand up. Any questions? People are getting their thoughts together. We can run the poll.
I'll take the critique as well.
Yeah, me to the comment.
Go ahead, Patrick. If it's a comment, you'll have to keep it very short.
Yeah, I thank Dan and Michael for the nice presentation, synthesizing all the projects in the hub. And what I have seen that what they have presented is generating knowledge the way other hubs have done it, like that one from the India. You see that they are sharing knowledge, how knowledge is created based on indigenous knowledge, empowering people with knowledge to have sustainable future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patrick. We've got some wonderful comments going in the chat. No questions as yet. But you can take a look at the comments in the chat. And if you like, Michael, we have Lunga who's raised his hand from South Africa. Go ahead, Lunga. Take the floor.
I think I read from Yemuna. He's asking, need to look into the logical basis of what we call tradition in India. This would include the okay, I got you. In the context of Rwanda, what we say is traditional is possibly based on what the belief systems of our ancestors before the colonial era. And I'm saying this because there is an understanding that even the mention of the word ancestral is gotten with an ill feeling. It's not fancy. It's not validated. When you talk about the knowledge systems, for example, rarely do they find themselves in the mainstream, because the mainstream through the media. Give an example of the medicine. If you are a traditional person and you're providing traditional medicine, you are looked at with an evil eye, if I may. And we know that some of these medicines are authentic, they work. But because you say you are a traditional healer, you are castigated. That's what I mean. So these knowledge systems, actually to an extent, a traditional healer is equated to be evil in some cases. And this is a narrative that has been created. Anything traditional being bad in most cases, anything modern being fancy and authenticated. So this is what I'm talking about, that we should strive to make sure that some of these traditional knowledge systems also are kept in the mainstream. That's what I mean.
Great, thanks. Lunga, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thanks, Rosie. No, I just wanted to just to say something around the role of individual of indigenous knowledge and how it has been presented in terms of it needing to be recognized for even not being quantified or needing to be quantified, but perhaps if that was the case, then what kind of measure would it take? Because I think it's very important. We see community based kind of knowledge coming through and not being integrated into the traditional education systems. But I guess first steps, perhaps, did they have any sort of suggestions in terms of some of the first steps that need to be taken so that we can use this knowledge and then find ways to validate them, either mainstream or sideways? But one way to actually make them accessible and validated, something that can be accessed and people can try and replicate.
Yes, I think I'll go ahead and provide some perspective on that. We live an increasingly quantified world that people love to see, love to prove. And some of these knowledge systems cannot be proven. Now, the challenge with our colonial legacies is that anything at some point was just trashed, if I may. The belief systems, the religion, traditional religion, and everything in between. And it's going to take time to educate the masses that, you know, modern knowledge systems can cohabitate with the traditional knowledge systems. And, you know, we also live under heavy influence of, I would say, the media, which I would honestly say is also representative of whatever mainstream validators of knowledge are. So the question is not as simple as it sounds. I would say continuously advocate, continually conduct research as we've done, continuously educate people about the worth of this, and also make people proud about those knowledge systems. That's what I would say. It's not going to be as easy as it sounds. But I think these are legacies of tradition, of colonial, neo-colonial, where almost everything indigenous was outrightly down-trashed. It's going to take time, in my view.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for your questions. I think let's move on to the poll, because we do want to give you 3-4 minutes to respond. First question. What are the top 3 things that sparked yes? We found that too. Question 2. Which 3 things do you feel no, that doesn't apply to our project? And what would you like to add based on your project experiences? But just to, if everyone can bring on your cameras, just to give Dan and Michael and actually all the network at Rwanda just a huge round of applause for their deep thinking that has gone through. You can see by the claps that everyone knows how much the thought and effort has gone into this. So thank you, Dan and Michael. And just also a huge thank you to Poonam and Amir from India, who presented. Last closing thoughts. I'd just like to invite Jimai. Hi from India. She's going to give us just her 2 minutes reflection on her experience of the day. So just to close off, she's going to give 2 minutes, just her own thoughts of how she experienced today. So thank you.
Thank you, Rosie. Hello, everyone. I'm Chinmay, and I work in a school for Adivasi children. And after 3.5 hours on Zoom, almost 4, this is easily the most energized I have felt. And I've learned so much, and more importantly, I felt so much today. And at the very beginning of the day, Rosie had mentioned the gift of story. And for me, a lot of today has been about that. The stories that I heard from so many of you today has been these bridges that connected me to places that are so, so far away, and still it was so easy to find that resonance. There have been invitations to wonder, to break boundaries, to be vulnerable. And I remember reading somewhere that the stories that we tell ourselves draw that very thin line between victimhood and agency. And so many of the stories that were told today held that power and restored agency. And that was really, really powerful. And this line of work where many of us act as practitioners, researchers, academicians, it can tend to be isolating at times. But I'm sure that the kind of hope and solidarity that emerged from today will be something I fall back on those dark days. And really thank you all so much for that. And this conference and this first day has been a matter of the heart as much as it has been with the head and mind. And yes, closing off this little poem, this 4 lines from Livelihoods, which is that hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And I hope that this little bird of hope keeps all of you warm and safe on that thing. It's truly an honor, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Chinmayi. Leon, did you just want to say anything before we close off today?
Just, it's very difficult to follow Chinmayi and her wonderful reflections. And just to say that I share all of those, it's just been so energizing, and it shows the power of bringing people together from these very diverse projects, and how generative and energizing the process can be. I mean, I think the issues that people are dealing with are very visceral, they're very real, and the nature and the depths of the inequalities and the challenges that people are facing are enormous. But I think what's really struck me today once again, is just the sheer power, possibility of bringing people together, of co-creating in this way, and the tremendous creativity that can be unleashed. I think our masters would like us to believe that the only valid research is research that's done in a top-down way by experts, but actually, how could you ever hope to achieve such rich understandings as we've heard today without empowering people to do their own research and to democratize knowledge in that way? So I'd just like to thank everybody. It's been a wonderful day, and I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. And thanks so much, Rosie, for your team for facilitating the day so nicely today.
Thank you, everyone. I'm actually not going to end off where the toilets are. You can look at the program. We have the exact same program for tomorrow, same time. We're going to start at exactly 2 minutes past the hour. We will have a range of people to hear from. There's 90 speakers over our 3 days together and 62 presenters. So I'm actually just going to end off with that please join us. We'll stick to the program. That's our roadmap. Same Zoom link, same time. And a huge thank you to all the sessions that presented today. Big thank you. You can unmute yourself and say goodbye. Turn on your camera.
Can we give you this?
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Tomorrow.
Great meeting. Great meeting.
Very lovely day.
Everyone, and thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Wonderful.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
we will
you.
share the
Thanks,
results.
Rosie. Thank you.
Lovely
share
day.
the
Thank you,
results.
Rosie and Mickey and everybody.
Thanks, Hayla. Thanks,
Goodbye.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
The development of the city of Pune in India has been closely intertwined with its changing waterscapes. Even though it is served by several reservoirs and groundwater, this fast-growing city faces numerous challenges related to freshwater management, degradation of the environment, and public health. Can these issues be addressed through our current education systems?
Seeing children as future water keepers, future custodians of our water and of our planet, then it's very important that they have this interdisciplinary focus on water that not only looks at the physical and natural science aspects, which is well covered in textbooks in India, but also understands the ethical values, the aesthetic values, the symbolism, the issues around equity and access and just water justice, and then gender and women's water work and how so much of that work is unpaid for.
During our interactions with middle school students from urban areas, we found that it is not very intuitive for them to connect the water that they're using to the nature around them, like the food that they're eating, maybe the climate, or maybe the communities that co-inhabit their own cities. There was obviously systems thinking that needed to be implemented, and to enable such systems thinking, we engaged the students in conversations around water and saw it through multiple disciplines.
दोनों साइड से वो घूम रहा है ना, अगर सामने भी घूमे तो
Classes, we learned a lot about how the different type of where water comes from. I wasn't really aware of all those kind of stuff and how it's used and like some discriminations.
Like I was surprised to see that so much water is used for making like burger and all of the things, which I thought would use like the least amount of water. But reduced eating burger seriously.
As an educator, it made me aware that water is interdisciplinary to include not only physical and scientific aspects of water, but also social relationships around access to water such as gender, caste, poverty, and other structures.
Students can express their opinion, their emotions on water themes in scientific, social, financial, and cultural, and also at ethical way.
These sessions encourage me to discuss with students through activities and conversations around water values, cultural practices, and water as human right.
The way they enjoying, the way they participating, the way they are connecting with each other. They are very much in the participating, joyful, and that is. And I think more than learning, I think that is one of the success. Every classroom they are coming with very enthusiastic way. They are leaving with the a lot of learning and everything. I think that was the ultimate success for me when I see the process and any.
Now, whatever we have learned, we are going to spread this message to other students also. From standard 5th to 8th, we are going to cover or we are planning to arrange where one topic, whatever we have learned, we are going to conduct over there with the different students of our school students. So that whatever we have learned at ISER, it will reach to maximum students as well as the teachers.
Dit is Doringbaai, dit is onze oceaan, dit is ons lewe, hier is waar ons hartklop het. Ons is die hartklopmense, ons is die vissers, die inheemse vissers van hierdie see. En dit is ons lewe, ons is een met hierdie see. En as dit van ons af weggeneem word, as ons nie meer hier kan lewe nie, dan het ons nie meer lewe nie. Want dit is al lewe wat die Doringbaai vissergemeenskap ken, van geboortedag af tot nou toe.
Waar die vis mag gebroei het, daar is hulle besig om nou te myn. En die visse is nie meer so verpolder soos dit gewees het nie in die vorige jare nie. Dit is die vierde keer wat die weer gaan, want hulle die training van die kom te maak die visse dan in die huis die trepe volk kan behoor die training. Nou, toe dink ek, wat nou te sê, die arme visse wat in die water is, hoe moet hulle dit ook?
They use drawings and focus group discussions to explore and find answers together. This method worked well as women are often excluded from public life. Women were given a training workshop on a topic of their choice, and they were trained in understanding the research process so that they could be on equal footing with the research team and the process.
Die research het iets in my uitgebring wat ek kan vandag met lof sê, ek kan nou uitgaan in my gemeenskap en baie meer met lof
us very important in this research that we give the women the opportunity, especially women that lives along the coastline, to engage with each other to build a strong movement.
Wat ek geleer het hierdie naweek is om op te staan en ook om te praat vir ons reg en om ook in hulle se besluitneming ook ons monde op te maak en te sê maar dit is die regie. Kom ons kyk as ons dit so doen of dit so sal werk nie.
This research process has created an awareness, and the women who participated in the research started to explore alternative means of income, such as gardening crops, creating arts and craft products, and recycled waste goods. They developed the courage to engage the mine bosses and government departments armed with the research. The women are now empowered to engage in advocacy with key players, government departments for fishing quotas, and to ensure meaningful space for public participation. Women have now become self-reliant and they found their creative voice.
Daar is oplossing voor problemen in die gemeenskap, soos welzijnproblemen, gezondheidsproblemen en probleme miskien met onze leiers. Hy sien het kan opgelos word as ons met mekaar en ons leer van mekaar. En die grootste sien ek dat ek geleer het, saam staan en met een stem 'n ding verhef.
Some of the root causes of the social ills that we see out there, the cause that's at early childhood. So the ECDs, they play such an important role that in most of these children's life, the only proper meal they receive is from the ECD centers.
Education and also something to fill up the stomach because with an empty stomach you can't do anything. Their kids are happy to come to school so that they can get something to eat, knowing very well that at school my child is full, is eating.
There's a high unemployment rate here in Makanda, and if then parents are not working, it means that there's food insecurity in their homes. How can we reduce hunger, or how can we assist in this issue of food insecurity? Nutrition plays a big part in development of a child because it helps with cognitive development. Because if there's no nutritious food, then it means that the brain won't develop properly. It won't develop properly, and there might be stunting, there might be health issues. So all these things, they are there. Our point of entry are the ECD centers, where children, we know that children spend most of the days of their day there.
Nobody can stop me. I'm on my way. I'm going there.
These children that are coming here, they depend on grant. So a grant is only 450, and you can imagine the parents are not working. How many parents that are working? Maybe 12 parents are working.
By having this garden, they will see and they will know that when they eat spinach, when they eat potatoes, where do this potato comes from? And we can do it with our hands.
If we make sure, together with the ECDs, because they are also worried about this issue, and they want to make a difference in those learners' life. So they are very much committed in having, they realize the value of having vegetable gardens in their centers.
So if we keep on with this garden, so the parents can also benefit.
I need happy and active children in the class. That's why I plant here.